How are you? Thanks so much for meeting with me today. And we have some questions to answer. And so I'm so excited to open our mailbag and take a look at these
Yes,
questions that got sent to us.
I am
And
too.
yeah, and so we're going to give a crack at answering these questions. And then we're also going to reach out to others and get their responses too. And so thanks so much for taking the time. Can you tell us where we are, where you are right now?
I'm in my beautiful stateroom on board the HMS Carousel in the Gulf of Mexico, so Fushon, Louisiana right now. We just got a charter, so we're gonna go out to a rig in the next day or two. So yeah, calling from my stateroom.
Awesome. Thanks so much for calling in and making this time for us. So let's go ahead and start looking over some of these questions. The first one that came in was about wearing makeup. Do you wear makeup out at sea? And can you tell us a little bit about your experience with that? And if not, we'll move to the next question. Someone out there does wear makeup. I know they do.
Yeah, I wear a tinted foundation, but my uniforms and stuff aren't white. I see the question was asking about like keeping clean a white shirt, so I haven't come against that struggle. I don't choose to wear makeup currently because I'm in the Gulf of Mexico, and as anyone that's sailed in the Gulf of Mexico recently, it's really humid and hot, so it's just a mess. But I'm all for doing whatever you feel to make yourself comfortable, makeup or no makeup, whatever you want. Um, but as to this question, I don't know the answer because we never wear white shirts. I'm assuming this is someone that has a beautiful, crisp, clean linen shirt or uniform shirt, and I haven't had the pleasure of that experience.
Yeah, we need to talk to our cruise ship people and figure out how they do it. And I don't
Yeah,
wear makeup
totally.
that much anymore. So, and I always struggle with that. When I do wear makeup, I get it everywhere on everything. So I'm, I'm not the right person for this. All right. So we have a group of questions that are next about our menstrual cycles. And so let's take that first question and break it down a little bit and give us your advice that you have.
Sure. Um, so the question is about nausea, cramps, and diarrhea on their first day of their period, and what I recommend, or we would recommend, but will help with the menstrual cycle when at sea. Um, with nausea, as people know, seasickness is a little bit different than period sickness, but I would imagine if you are getting nausea from your menstrual cycle, then you would be exacerbated when if you had some seasickness as well. So for that, I would recommend probably doing an anti-nausea medicine, seasickness specifically, but it's not going to be any different except for the motion of the vessel on the boat. So if you have a medicine that works good for you off the boat, whatever that might be for us in America, it'd be like a Midol or an anti-cramp medicine. That's something that you can absolutely take on the boat. It is important though, if you get a prescription drug from your doctor to just disclose it when you get to the boat. And most ships also carry a fully stashed medical blocker. So if you do come down with symptoms that you're not usually used to and you want to reach out to a doctor ashore, we're more than equipped to do that and usually have all the medicines that we would need to come into use for that kind of thing. But for me personally, my menstrual cycle isn't really any different at shore versus on land. So whatever you need to make yourself comfortable on land is going to also work for you offshore and sailing.
Yeah, and I'd recommend just talking to your doctor about it and seeing what their advice is. I think that it's always good to have that open and honest conversation with those that can help us the best.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's a little touchy sometimes because as women on ships, we're surrounded by men, so sometimes the medical officer might be a man, but the chain of command is very equipped for this type of question. We're used to different types of discretion that we need to have for medical advice, so that's all confidential. So anything that you tell your medical officer, whoever that might be assigned to your ship, is confidential apart from the captain. So that should all be confidential. So you shouldn't have any problems going to your medical officer for any of these medical questions. There was a question about whether or not how many tampons and pads and if ships provide it. Generally, on we do carry a stock of tampons or pads in the hospital. However, I would not rely on that as your only means of sanitary napkins and tampons and things of that nature. I, as a rule, bring I'm working 3 weeks on, 3 weeks off. So I usually bring double what I need for all of my toiletries, regardless of it being period essentials and or anything else, just in case things change. Also, it's good to ask if you can ship things, if you can order things to the vessel, because that's really helpful if you forget things. But yeah, as a general rule, most vessels will carry some sort of sanitary napkin or tampon. However, I wouldn't rely on it. Generally, they're not the nicest products that you can buy. They're usually the cheapest. So the applicators and stuff aren't the most comfortable in my experience, but in a pinch, you can definitely get by it. That being said, other types of vessels, I've only ever sailed on ocean going until I went to offshore. We don't carry them here. If we were to get an international voyage, then we would have to put them on. So there's not a supply for me from this offshore side of things for me to pull from. That might vary company to company, but it's always good to bring what you need, and probably at least double it or at least 1.5 times what you think you're going to need just in case.
Yeah, that's great advice. And our other question was about a ship that burns their trash. And
Yeah.
so have you been on a ship that burns their trash, and how did you work with that?
Yeah, I was on with the research vessels. We would burn our trash. We did sort it from food scraps, and then everything else was burnt. And to be honest, I never asked the question about my sanitary napkins and tampons. I know it would potentially be hazardous waste if you really wanted to break it down, but I imagine that all the women on board just put it in the regular trash and it was incinerated as such. Whether or not that's the right answer, I can't speak to that, but that's my experience. We were never advised one way or another while I was on a vessel that burned trash regarding that particular thing. It'd be interesting because I know when I was a cadet at Cal Maritime, we did burn trash there. I'm wondering if maybe someone from Cal Maritime recently would have that regulation or something, because I do remember that being something that we did. I just don't remember the specifics of it. Again, the chain of command when it comes to medical things, and I would consider this question a medical question, should be confidential. So you should be able to ask your supervisor and or the master what you do. I know it's embarrassing and it might be uncomfortable, but that's really the best answer to that question.
Yeah,
Me.
and I think that it's an important question that we get answered, because as more women join the vessels, then it becomes a bigger question that needs to be solved. And so,
Absolutely.
You might be the only one out there now, and it's not that much waste that you're creating, but hopefully it will be eventually. The more people that get on board.
Yeah, we won't stigmatize it. Sorry.
Yeah.
I was just gonna say it hopefully won't be stigmatized. I mean, again, we're still progressing towards that, and it's a natural part of our bodies, so it needs to be accepted, and hopefully that won't be an embarrassing question in the future, but
right,
we're working there.
Yeah. So I just made it myself a note, Max, to reach out to somebody at Cal Maritime and ask that question, because they might have a good answer for us.
Yeah.
Okay, so Max, I have this great question. Let me read it for you. It says, I have been working in the marine industry as a commercial diver for a few years now and love it. However, I'm now thinking about long-term goals and ambitions, as I don't want to be diving continuously for years to come. I would love to work offshore, but not as a diver, and I'm wanting some advice on career pathways and valuable tickets to acquire, so companies know I'm serious. Also, what opportunities are there for traineeships within the industry? I kind of thought I would get my rigging tickets and bosey it, but don't want to waste my funds if it amounts to nothing. Any help or advice would be appreciated. All right,
absolutely.
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'd love to hear your perspective.
So currently right now, there's a mariner shortage. We are faced with a mariner shortage. And I know personally at the company that I work for, as well as all the other companies down here in the Gulf of Mexico, speaking of supply, are really hard pressed for mariners. There's multiple ways to make this into a career. The one that I came from is a university side of things. It's not necessarily feasible for everyone, especially if you're an older person and you don't want to go back to school. Totally doable. I think the most important thing, if you're planning to work on an offshore supply vessel or even potentially a drill ship in the baseline career, so you'd be an ordinary seaman or perhaps a wiper in the engine room, you want to look into getting your lifeboatman and then also your firefighting. And once you have that, you can apply for your basic MMC and do your basic training and things of that nature. And that can get you in the door at a lot of these companies. Specifically offshore, I totally understand not wanting to pay out of pocket for your classes, particularly like rigging and T Hewitt, the Bozit, the helicopter training and things. So I know that that was all paid for by my company when I came in. So again, there's such a shortage right now. It's really important to try to just get your basic merchant mariner credential, which is pretty baseline. It's a little bit expensive. I don't know what the class total would be, maybe 1,000, maybe a couple of thousand. I'm not exactly sure. We would have to look at that. But it's relatively, especially if you're working, you can do it in your off time as a commercial diver. If you guys get chunks of time off, they're pretty easy to acquire, maybe a week or two here or there. And that credential can get you in the door at a lot of these companies. Again, you'd be starting as on the bottom of the totem pole. But right now, especially in supply, it's really quick to work up. A lot of companies too will potentially give you a higher rating in pay right now if you're really a hard worker to promote your allegiance to those companies. So I think it's totally doable. You can go to university if you wanted to and come out with a third mate or third engineer license ticket, but that's not necessary. Again, we need we need mariners, any kind of mariner. And that also includes if you wanted to go onto the like kitchen side of things, the galley staff, that's all the same basic ticket. So it's all your basic training and then your firefighting that's necessary. And I think it's pretty easy to get into. Our company's offshore in the Gulf currently. I'm not quite sure about other boats, but I would imagine if we're having a mariner shortage, then everyone's having a mariner shortage.
Yeah, and this is my job at Women Offshore is the director of career support, and so I run a development program twice a year. We're about to release it again, and so you can apply. You can have a meeting with me once a week to set out your goals and to figure out the best path for you. And we have scholarships available to help you pay for these classes. And so send me a message. Christine at womenoffshore.org. I'm here to help and to talk about your specific goals and desires in your career path. So that's great. Absolutely. Thanks so much for answering that or asking that question. And Max, thanks so much for giving your perspective. And I completely agree that we need more mariners, and there's so many different avenues and ways to get out into the industry. Yeah, totally. All right, back to our mailbag. And our next question is, so the next one that I kind of wanted to talk about, which I really enjoyed, was how long in weeks does it take to learn sailing? And so that question is kind of open-ended for me because there's the difference between working on or just like going out for a day sail on a sailboat, and then there's like the commercial shipping side. And so Max, can you kind of give us you talked about going to an academy and what that might look like. So let's talk about what the term learn sailing means and break it down a little bit. Sure. Yeah, to me, I'm not a sailor in the traditional sense of a sailboat sailor, so I can't answer that question. Commercial sailing, from my path, I went to a 4-year maritime academy. So in the United States and across the world, there's several maritime universities. And when you graduate from these universities, you are qualified to be a third mate or a third engineer, generally. Of course, that changes country to country. So the typical structure of that is your freshman and sophomore year, kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. You're required to do a certain amount of sea time. Your classes also count for sea time. So for example, you would be doing ship operation classes, which would be the very basics. You learn how to needle gun, how to chip and grind, how to put a proper coat of paint on. And that's a full year of school. Also, small boat handling. And then you do knot tying, bosun work and things of that nature. You do rigging, you do all sorts of stuff. How long it takes to become proficient at those specific things, I feel like it's kind of a lifelong pursuit. I have been out here for 12 years, and I have not been on that rigging and tying up side of things as a second mate for a really long time. And when I came back offshore, part of that as a mate here, regardless of what you are, you can jump on deck. And I will say that
I know what I'm doing, but it took me a while to come back to it. So again, it's one of those things that like if you stop doing it, you will lose it a little bit, in my opinion. There's lifelong bosuns, ABs, OSs who are extraordinary seamen, but I think the pursuit is lifelong to get super proficient in the basics. I don't know that a 4-year education is enough, to be honest. That's just scratching the tip of the iceberg. There's so many unique fields out here that so I went from commercial tanker shipping to research, and that in and of itself was a completely new challenge.
Yeah.
And that took me 2 or 3 years to relearn that job, watch keeping, the different science things that we would do, et cetera, et cetera. And then coming from research to the offshore supply industry, I've been here just over a year and a half. And I think I'm starting to get the hang of things. I'm really proficient, I think, at the paperwork side, because that kind of transitions. A lot of the programs we use across different companies that I've been at have been the same. But again, like I said, I haven't been rigging very often on my second mate side of things at the research vessel. So coming back in and relearning all that stuff took me a while. It's like putting an old pair of shoes on and be like, oh yeah, okay. But it does take some time to get back into. But again, anytime that you're gonna jump companies or go from a learning experience to the real world is going to be its whole new ball game. I think I'm starting to feel pretty comfortable after 18 months, but again, I would no way consider myself an expert mariner. I think every time that I come back to work, I learn something new, which is really good. To become proficient at sailing, I feel like maybe a couple years in the actual industry past your school education if you're going the school route. When I'm looking at the new people that are coming on as ordinary seamen and working their way up here offshore, it seems to be about the same thing, 2 or 3 years to get really proficient in the job. And then again, depending on what vessel you are at this particular company, you're doing very different things. So you're going to have to potentially relearn new skills every type of boat that you're on. The basics are all the same. Tying a knot is a knot. However, you have to learn how to do it each way that people want you to get it done. So I think a good 5 to 6 years, including your university education, and if not, maybe 3 to 4 years sailing full time. But again, it just depends on your position and how hands-on the company is, really.
Yeah, awesome. And so then to go back and talk about like small boat sailing and actually like rigging the sails and that type of thing. You can take like an ASA, which is like the American Sailing Association. They offer 2-day courses where you go and you get to learn how to rig a sailboat and how to sail an actual sailboat. And so, there's everything in between that, from just like your very basic boat handling and then all the way up to, learning and being an extreme professional of the trade.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
absolutely. It's definitely a scale. It's as much energy as you're willing to give it is going to be your answer to that question. What is an expert? I don't know what that number is. Is it 3 years in the same position? Is it 15 years in a million different positions in the same rank? Is it working on tiny boats coming, there's not really an answer to that. But reasonably, I would say on the commercial side of things, 4-ish years seems to be the average. I would feel 4 to 5 in my experience.
Yeah, that's great. And thanks for the question. All right, we're going to get into some tough questions now. Just want to give everyone a trigger warning. We're going to be talking about sexual assault and sexual harassment. And we had a couple questions come in about how a person should approach the stigma against reporting SASH. And so we're going to start with the reporting part of it first. And this person that asked the question said, I'm experiencing this from fellow male and female shipmates, and she would like some help on how she should approach the stigma against reporting SASH. Max, what's your recommendation?
This is very hard because it is also something in evolution. The correct answer is that no one in a professional setting should have to deal with sexual harassment or assault. Unfortunately, due to the uniqueness of shipping, our job is where we also live. So it becomes a bit of a gray area in terms of people's comfort. We don't have the ability to escape attention that we may or may not want. We don't have the ability to leave and go home at night and bounce ideas off of other people depending on our level of communication, particularly if we have internet connection to call or talk. It's just kind of hard to bounce ideas off of things. So that's really unfortunate. I'm very sorry to hear that you're dealing with something like this. The stigma itself is getting better in my experience, but I totally understand the fear of speaking up because you think that you're going to get some sort of backlash, and that's really unfortunate. My biggest bolster to that type of thing is, although I might have it hard, I am paving the way for someone to have a better result in the future by my experience. So I would encourage you to find your company's standards. They should all have standards. Ours are posted all on our ship, specifically about harassment. The last 2 or 3 companies that I've been on have specific sexual harassment policies posted on the ship. If you don't feel comfortable going through your chain of command, perhaps someone in your chain of command is the one that's perpetrating this. Like, there's usually a designated person offshore that you can call and go over your chain of command. I would suggest that if you feel like you can trust your chain of command, that you should go through your chain of command. But if you feel like if you can't go through your chain of command for whatever reason, or they're not respecting you, or they're perpetrating the stigma against you, then definitely call your designated person ashore. Apart from that, I know our company has an employee assistance program dealing specifically with like therapy and crisis situations. So that's another asset that I'm able to call. I believe a lot of companies have this, but unfortunately, the stigma is only going to get better as more and more people stand up to this stigma. And it might be something that may not be worth it right now, but if you think about the future and how that could potentially help any other mariner that's dealing with in the future, I personally think it's worth it. And it's really hard. I mean, it's a really crappy situation. I'm very sorry that you have to deal with that. But that's my best suggestion for you.
Yeah, and we're not shirking away the feelings, the emotions behind it, because it is real and it is your job, and you're worried that you're going to lose it. And I know that it keeps a lot of people silent.
Yeah, it's really hard. I personally, because I've seen a change. I've seen a change in, I would say, in my experience. I've always been fed this idea that I need to be a boy's girl. That's this narrative that I've been led to believe, and I think it's kind of a dangerous one. I feel like I do love hanging out with guys, but I have given up some of my not morals, but I withstand things that I don't think that people need to, in terms of like that gray line. You know, I think that I'm a pretty accepting person, and I think that my boundaries aren't that high, and I'm personally okay with a certain amount of banter back and forth, whatever that might be. And if sometimes people were to overhear some of the things that I'm saying with shipmates that I've been working with for 8 years, it might not be there's definitely times where it's probably not appropriate, but there's also people that will force themselves to accept things that they don't think they can accept, and that's just not okay. I think one of the best things in that kind of situation is, if something makes you uncomfortable, whenever it makes you uncomfortable, you need to establish that boundary. And I know how hard that is. I know how hard that is. Again, if we're not establishing boundaries, then people don't know when to stop. And it might be as simple as that, too, is being able to say, hey, you know, that kind of made me uncomfortable. I don't really want to talk about this. And that's perfectly okay. And if someone doesn't accept that, then absolutely that's its own form of harassment as well. But I think we also need to be a bit better about establishing boundaries, especially as women. We're just not accustomed to, we're getting better, I think, but I think that we are generally, this is very big generalization, we're people pleasers, and we want people to like us. And it's important for people to like you for a certain extent at work. You have to be agreeable, you have to get along with people, you have to be respectful. But if you have a boundary, I think it's really important to set your boundaries. And I think that's a good first step too. But absolutely not minimizing suffering. It totally is a terrible feeling. And unfortunately, I think I say for a lot of women and men, we've all been there.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for your
Yeah.
question. And Max, thanks for your answer. So the question
Okay.
that I wanted to go to next is, do you help women in the event they have a rough deal on board where they feel they
Oh,
have no one to go to and they approach you for help? Let's talk about that.
okay. Absolutely. Anyone that's going to approach me on board, I'm going to do anything in my power that I can to make their situation better and evaluate from a fair stance and try to mitigate whatever they feel is unjust or whatever the issue is. As a leader on board, you have to listen to multiple sides of a story, but obviously, if you are being confided in, especially if someone is afraid to go to someone else, that's a very big responsibility and it's kind of an honor too. So absolutely, I would say you want to advocate for anyone that is trusting you to advocate for them within reason, obviously. I think it's very important as a woman to go on board and try to figure out who your best allies are and really develop a relationship with them. As far as it goes in terms of the sexual harassment and things that are whatever a rough deal might be, unfair treatment or people thinking lesser of you or whatever, it's kind of still a gray area in a lot of those things. We have a policy for harassment, but we don't necessarily have a policy for what if people don't like you. And so at this point in my career, I've been sailing long enough professionally to know that I don't need to like someone to work with them. I need to be able to respect someone. And that's pretty hard lesson to learn personally for me when I was younger. I thought that I needed to do all sorts of things to change who I was to make people like me because I thought that was necessary of the position. So that's one caveat on that. I can do whatever I can within my policy, and I have in the past. If someone's not comfortable going to someone for whatever reason, I can step in as that person's advocate. I can also be in the room with that person. That's another thing. If you are in a situation with someone that you might not want to talk to, you can always ask to have someone else present with those situations. Anything that comes to do with sexual harassment and or behavioral things, there should always be someone as a witness. That's really important for you guys to know that you're more than within your right to have someone else be present. And a lot of companies do that anyway, but if you didn't know that, that's something that you should totally advocate for yourself or for someone else to be a third party, just to be a third party, non-biased person in a meeting. So, there's multiple ways you can talk it out with someone. Just if people want advice, that's one thing. If people just want to vent, that's another thing. It's also important for you to not always be the person that gets vented to, because that also happens to women on board vessels. And that's where boundaries come in. So if you, as someone that is being approached to help advocate, don't feel comfortable, that's also not your responsibility if it's with beyond the realm of the scope of the work. So it kind of depends on the situation. So I'm here for anyone within reason. I also don't want to deplete my energy where it should be focused somewhere else. So that's just something to keep in mind. If I find a situation that needs to be risen to the next level, I now, 13 years in, 12 years into my career, am comfortable going to any captain and saying, hey, this isn't right. But as a new mariner, I think that's very hard. So absolutely, I will happily do that for you if I feel that the situation warrants it. If I feel the situation warrants going above the master, whoever that person might be, I am also happy to do that. And I think that just comes with age. I'm kind of dependent on who you get at sea, what their tolerance of different might be, regardless of gender or race or religion. We're getting better, but it's not the ideal. So yeah, absolutely. If someone comes to you with a very serious or even not so serious issue, it's always good for you to at least listen and see how you can help the situation.
Thanks, Max. And once again, Women Offshore is here. We have a save program and we can take emails to their hello account. You can email me as well, straight to the Christine email as well. And, we're here to listen. We're here to help you navigate these difficult situations and provide resources for you. So if there's nobody on board that you're able to lean on, if Max isn't on your vessel and you can't go in and tell her what you're feeling, then you can email us and we can help you the best we can. So
yeah, absolutely. The women offshore community is amazing. I've had so many questions answered through the grapevine. You can do it anonymously. You can do it in our forums. It's just such a great place to get your questions answered. And there's so many different viewpoints across the world, which is really cool too. 'Cause as an American, we don't necessarily think in the same way as other countries. It's very well proven. So that's really helpful too, I find, is like, oh, okay.
yeah,
The solution is a lot, like there's a lot of different solutions that you can pull from, and it's kind of cool in that sense for sure.
Yes, and we have ambassadors through Women Offshore all over the world. Max is the American ambassador for us, and we have, I think, 6 or 8 other women scattered all over the world who are here that are, advocating for us all. So it's great. We have somebody that might have a more local knowledge of the customs and traditions and cultures and laws and regulations as well. So we can help you get in touch with them. So all right, Max,
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk about that contractual question next. And so do you want to give it a shot?
The question was, how can women mariners protect themselves contractually as a safeguard against potential abuse or dangerous interpersonal situations on board? Contractually for me is a weird word. I don't sign a contract when I go to work and this type of thing. We have policies within our company that we have to adhere to. And if you're in breach of any of those policies, you could be punished, regardless of what that punishment might be. You might get a dock and pay. You might have to take a class to mediate your behavior or the issue. You might have to go down a position to train. You might have to be under mentorship from someone else, and you might get fired. Like there's lots of different policies. So I'm not sure specifically with the contractual piece that you're kind of talking about, but that's how I would take it. You would want to be familiar with your policies and procedures on board, regardless of what those have to deal with. Every company that I've ever been to has had a anti-abuse, anti-harassment, sexual harassment prevention policy. That's pretty set in stone in America. I imagine that's a worldwide standard, but I can't speak to the world. I'm imagining that is an international standard in sorts, obviously a little bit differently. That being said, if I was to come across any type of sexual harassment, I would look at that policy first and make sure that I know that policy and who I should go to in regards to that particular, whatever it might be. Again, I think there's a lot of safeguards that you could place yourself on board. Unfortunately, we don't necessarily know who our crewmates are. A lot of people shuffle in and out. Some companies are really fortunate. You become really tight with your crew members. You perhaps sail with the same 22 people, 8 people, whatever, for your entirety of your career. And they become a second family to you. Most vessel staterooms have locks. So if you're uncomfortable with the crew on board, you can absolutely lock your door. That shouldn't be an issue. That's something that I potentially do time to time if I don't know who's coming in and out of the vessel, just to feel a little bit safe. The master has a master key, so they should be able to get into your room at any time. Again, I'm not sure safety-wise what the policy is in terms of like firefighting and things. You might get pushback on that. That's where you need to go in and look at your company policy. There's potentially times where you might have to room with other people. At this company, I know that they make a real effort to pair genders together in that type of situation, or in a situation where I'm on watch for 12 hours, I'm in the room to myself for 12 hours, and then the other my watch partner I switch with takes the room. So in that case, the gender doesn't really come into play that much. There's been times where things like laundry go missing, things of those situations. So I just be careful about minding your own things, make sure that you kind of mind what you want. It's really hard. It's a unique situation where we live where we work. So we are required to be professional, but there's also this weird phase of our day where we're off and we might be socializing with people and people might read your intentions wrong, or even if your intentions aren't wrong, there's been romances at sea. We would be foolish not to acknowledge that. So that's just something that you need to figure out. Again, we're going back to boundaries, what your boundaries are. And as a younger, we're going to drew this as someone that is a cadet or straight coming in for a couple, year of sailing or whatever. Personally, when I was younger, I know that I didn't always make the best choices in terms of attention. I think a lot of us struggle with this, and I wish that I would have been able to establish my hard boundaries when I was a little bit younger. I think it would have been a lot easier. I personally don't socialize with the crew in my off time. It's a lot easier here because we don't have shore leave. I've had many great nights with crew ashore on other vessels, but it does become more of a gray area. So again, you need to ask yourself what you're comfortable with. And I think that changes based off of who you're surrounded by. So it's kind of one of those things that's ever evolving, unfortunately. And it's such a strange thing, because again, we live a large portion of our lives where we work, and it's not just work. We also eat meals and socialize with these people. So it's kind of an ever evolving thing. So you need to establish what those boundaries are. Mine might be a bit extreme for some people, but at this point in my career, I don't want to compromise who I have grown into for anything. And that's what I've decided. And that can change too, however, you just have to decide what you're comfortable with, and that can change. At any time, you could be comfortable with attention in a certain way, and then it can change.
Yeah.
And that's totally your prerogative. So communication is really key. I think a lot of people out here are lonely. And so if you just keep communication as honest as you can, that would be helpful. Again, it's a learning situation. So that's my best answers for that. You got to figure out what your personal boundaries are, and then obviously establish what human resources might have something to say about dating. That happens a lot. And then also what the sexual harassment or harassment policies are on your vessel. That can protect you, but it's kind of still a gray area.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your vulnerability, Max, and having these really truthful answers to these tough questions. It's great. That's what we're here for.
Yeah. Learning and growing and learning, making mistakes.
Yep. Yeah. And learning.
We all do.
Yeah.
And learning from them. Yes. And hopefully other people will learn as well from our mistakes. I think that's really important. I think that one of my philosophies, and I've said this over and over again, like if you're not learning, you're not growing. And one of the best ways to learn, unfortunately, is by making mistakes, regardless of what the mistake is. And it's also really helpful if you can see the human side of people when they make mistakes, because we all know what it feels like to have that, like, oh, yeah, I messed up. And it happens so much more here because we're living here too. So there's so much gray area, and there's so many times where you might say something that you think is funny, or like it just gets taken the wrong way, and you might have to be like, oh, sorry. I didn't mean it like that. I won't say it like that again, or I won't do that again. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. And that's a lot of conversations that we have day to day. It's like, oh, nope, sorry. Let me step back. Or no, I'm not comfortable with that. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me step back. And that's normal. That's actually the norm, I'm finding. But yeah, don't be afraid to make mistakes. But I think specifically as women, I've worked so much on this in therapy, thousands of dollars in therapy, not that much, but about establishing boundaries and really finding what your boundaries are, whatever that might be, and sticking to them, and then growing and figuring out, okay, I'm comfortable with this now. Or I'm not comfortable with this anymore.
Right.
And that's totally fine.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it usually means that we have to be put into an uncomfortable situation to realize that we're not comfortable with it, and that it's not something that we want to experience again. So we have to go through that. It's kind of by fire, but hopefully we can have these conversations and give you possibly like scenarios of this is what could happen out at sea, and we want you to be prepared for it. And so we have a couple more questions that we're going to get through, and then we're going to have more honest conversations with Max. And so I have the next question is about resources or networking support for women who are interested in coming ashore. And so this is a great timing, whoever asked this question, because I just put together some content about this very thing, about all the things you think about as you're trying to transition into a shoreside career from being an operational out at sea type of person. And so, stay tuned for that. But yeah, we do have resources. Once again, feel free to reach out to me and I'm happy to share those with you. Next, we have a couple more questions here that we want to go over. And I am kind of excited about these personally because I know when I was young and new in the industry, I never felt like I had a person to ask these questions to. And so that's what we're here for. We're now having, now that we've had a little bit of experience in the industry and we're trying to make everyone's lives a little bit better. So the first question is, how do you deal with unwanted attention from male colleagues? What if someone is giving you weird vibes, but they actually haven't crossed the line yet? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, that's a very difficult gray area. I think the theme of this question and answer and these particular topics is it's a lot of gray. I know that we all want the answers to be black or white, but unfortunately they're not. If someone hasn't crossed the line yet, you need to decide how much attention you are willing to pay this person. I think that oftentimes as a younger cadet, in my experience, I found myself being a little bit more friendly and outgoing than I normally am. And that usually brought some unwanted attention. And also, I think in my experience as a young, new third mate, second mate, whatever, my nerves came out and over becoming, I call it my sparkle, and over sparkly and becoming infectious because you want people to like you and you want to do a good job. And this is the only way that I personally knew how to cope. It's really hard because, again, anyone that's a sailor and chooses to do it, you're usually a pretty very interesting person in my experience. And I think we're all really interesting people regardless of what we choose to do. So besides that point, but there's usually a lot of substance, and especially if you've been sailing as a cadet, you know that there's a lot of time that you're spending in close quarters with people where you're going to have to develop this bond that might not be developed other times. I kind of call it like the camp bond, where people become like best friends within a week. It's a very compressed timeline. I'm sure there's lots of psychology research about this, but that's kind of how I view it, because you're in such a confined space with someone that people become more attractive or less attractive really fast. I think if you can be kind, that is the best way to approach something. If you feel comfortable talking to this person, that is my biggest form of advice. Generally, if you talk to someone, their feelings might be hurt, but it is only between you and another person. So I find that that's probably the easiest way to deal with it in the long run. I think most people are reasonable people, in my opinion. I think most people are generally good people trying to do their best. And I think that when we go offshore, there's a lot of loneliness, and that breeds weird behaviors too. So I want to allow for grace for behaviors as well, because I know in my past that I've also had very strange tendencies and crushes or whatever. You know, it's part of being a human. So I think that if you can safely talk to this person about like, hey, I like you, but just as a colleague, professional, I don't find anything else. I just wanted to establish this boundary. You can even say something like that. Another way to do it would be to kind of freeze that person out, to kind of not necessarily be rude or anything, but don't allow any other interaction besides that, like meals with other people, so people can witness the behavior as well if it becomes weird. I'll tell you that if people are being creepy or weird to each other on board a vessel, everyone else knows. I hate to say it, like it's very rare that there's something that develops that the people that you live with in close quarters for months at a time don't realize. So that's why I think like approaching someone one-on-one, if you feel comfortable, is the best way, because you don't embarrass the other person. But yeah, if they don't cross the line, there's not really anything you can do. But again, I think you can use your voice and establish the boundary. Like, hey, I'm not here to be in a relationship. I'm not here to have anything with you or whatever. I just want to keep it professional. And that's probably the best way to do it. But these things happen. So you can either make yourself scarce, which is something that I personally do to a certain extent,
Yeah.
which healthy way to deal with the situation, but I find it's the least abrasive, or you can pull someone aside. If it gets past that point, then you would want to go to the chain of command and set up a meeting and nip it in the bud through the chain of command. But yeah, it's kind of rough.
And so Miriam Anthony said she had some really awkward moments and she was able to use humor to get through it. You know, she was able to pull the person
Mm,
aside and be like, hey, that time yesterday when you did this and that was really awkward and I'm not cool with that. And so she could like, you know, let them
yeah,
know exactly what she was feeling and thinking. And she was able to be like, you know, she tried to bring it with a little bit of lightness to it, and that way it
yeah,
wasn't so heavy. And so, but she's also standing up for herself, setting her boundaries, and declaring that she's not cool with the situation. And then that person might
right.
be like, "Oh, okay, like, oh, I get it now," or whatever. And so, you
Yeah,
know, there's so many different ways that you can tackle tough situations, and the creepiness is scary at sometimes. You're like, I don't know, I don't trust this person, I don't really want to be around them. And so making yourself scarce might be the safest thing for you to do, right? And to
yeah,
not be putting yourself in a situation where you're going to be potentially alone with a person that you don't trust. And so, you know, there's a
yeah,
lot of psychological safety, and what we want you to do is be able to talk to somebody about it and work through it. And if you can't talk directly to the person, like Max said, you know, use your chain of command and let them know that it's not a good situation for you to be in, and hopefully there's going to be someone there that can help you.
yeah, absolutely. That's what that chain of command is for. Obviously, one-on-one is the best if you feel comfortable, but as a new cadet, or not a youth cadet, as a cadet transitioning, or even as a cadet, you might not be comfortable, especially as being the youngest person on board. We don't culturally, we don't really defer to the younger people on the ship. So uh, it becomes a problem if you're standing watch alone with this person, et cetera, et cetera. That's when you absolutely want to go through your chain of command. You want to stop any behavior that may feel weird or creepy to you. That's absolutely your intuition telling you that something's not wrong, and we need to cultivate that. It's so stifled right now. We need to cultivate that. So absolutely listen to that. You might be blowing it out of proportion, regardless of that fact. Establishing a boundary and standing up for yourself is absolutely the right way to do it, however you decide to do it.
Yeah, and this kind of feeds into our next question that's on the list about going to the captain if you're having a problem with another crew member or not. And so, you know, we kind of given you a couple different scenarios of, you know, when it is right to use your chain of command and, you know, if it's something that you can deal with. And I know personally when I was the youngest crew member on board, I never found my voice and I was never brave enough to go and confront a person face to face. And so I hope that you can. You know, I hope that you can be brave. But, you know,
Yeah.
what's your advice, Max?
I will just give examples of things that I've done in the past that I feel now as a person that's worked on themselves is wrong. I feel bad for when I publicly embarrass people that behaved in a way that I wasn't comfortable with. That's totally not the right thing to do. Again, it's a defense mechanism. And now, 13 years in, I am comfortable being like, maybe we shouldn't talk about this. But even still, I've found myself recently in situations casually on watch answering questions that after the fact, I'm like, wait a second, that was a weird topic to be talking about. There's a difference between casually having a conversation and your conversation evolving into a natural progression of like deeper and more insightful or personal questions. And that depends on a person by person. You might feel very comfortable with one person and you might spend an entire watch not talking to another person. I've done that too.
Yeah.
I don't think embarrassing someone as a defense is a good strategy personally because I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it. And I feel bad that I've done that to someone in the past. I personally in life don't love getting a cold shoulder out of nowhere. Again, this is hard because we're at work and it's a very professional scenario. So you need to be able to respect people But you don't have to like people, right? But then also, we all know what it's like to potentially be like vibing with someone and then someone says something wrong and then cold shoulder. And that's a terrible feeling too. This is probably a little bit deeper than that with the specific question about being uncomfortable with another crew member because probably someone has crossed that line and now you don't really know what to do. Said, like what Mimi said about approaching the situation one-on-one with a little bit of levity. That's always great if you can do that. But like Christine just said, it takes a long time to find your voice. And so I think anytime you feel uncomfortable enough to question it and you're not comfortable enough to talk to someone, you need to, or the person that's making you feel uncomfortable, you should probably bring it up to your chain of command, whatever way you might do it. Hey, do you remember that comment yesterday? You heard that, right? Yeah. Did you think that was a little weird or am I just blowing it out of my head? Sometimes people are like, oh no, I didn't think anything by it. Something that I hear all the time. And you're like, oh, okay. Or you can say, oh, that's interesting. I've never heard that before. And I don't know if I'm comfortable with it. Just putting it on someone's radar and also bouncing it off because, again, lots of times what I'm saying and what people are hearing are not the same thing and vice versa. Like this happens all the time. It happened to me today where I was like, no, you didn't say that. He said, no, I absolutely did. Sorry, so that's important too. But anytime that you're uncomfortable enough to question it, you should listen to that. So however you might do it, if it becomes an issue where you're super uncomfortable, it's affecting your work, it's affecting your sleep, it's affecting the way that you go about your day, then you absolutely need to put it up to your chain of command. That's a no-brainer. You just have to realize that the way that you might have dealt with it in that situation, say you were the captain or something, might be different than the way that your captain is going to deal with it. That's a thing that you need to realize too. So consequences can be more severe than what you had anticipated, or they could be completely lax, and you have to realize what's going to happen from those things too. So I find that like oftentimes people just misinterpret or feelings develop, which is totally natural. And the best way to deal with it is just to talk to someone, the person that's developing those feelings or being weird, because sometimes they don't even mean to. Sometimes they're like, oh, yeah, I do feel that way, but I'm sorry, I don't want to make you feel that way. I find that most men in my experience are decent guys and they don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. So there's some people that are going to be like, what do you mean? And then totally burn you. And that's when you can elevate the situation. But I think it's important to like, then before that's why it's important to be like, hey, did you hear that comment? Yeah, I did. What did you think about it? Was it creepy? Because I kind of felt it was creepy. Oh yeah, I kind of felt it was weird too. And then someone just clocks it with you. So yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, none of this is easy. And when you're living in an isolated place with people that you have to see every day, things get tricky. And so that's what we're here to talk about. All right, our last question of the day. And I really appreciate your time that you put into these and your honesty. So, is it okay to date a colleague at sea? How do you deal with the tension you get from the opposite gender at work? What if you decide you don't actually want to pursue anything romantically with someone? How do you cut it off without losing professionalism? So that's about 3 different questions. We could spend an hour talking about just this one. And so we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Max, let's hear what you
have. I have been on multiple boats. I have been on boats myself where I've been in relationship with other people on the boat, on the ship, on the vessel. There will be a tension that you're going to garner for these relationships that you may not want. And unfortunately, you just potentially have to deal with that attention. Depending on who you're dating, you could draw into question favoritism. A lot of companies have policies regarding dating at work, specifically on vessels. I know at several of my companies and some companies offshore, if you're dating someone at work, they require you to either be not a hierarchical issue potentially and or on separate boats. So again, I would consult HR. That's the professional answer. These things happen all the time, and a lot of times they're really good. A lot of times they end in marriages, they're beautiful, but a lot of times they end in not so good outcomes, just like in the real world. The difference is we don't necessarily get to choose to never see someone again if things don't work out.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
Unless we leave the company or go to different, you're gonna have to move mountains in certain situations if you can't leave your job or whatever and something doesn't end well. So that's a consequence that you need to take into consideration at the start. It's really hard. I find that the attention is really nice. And I don't want to lie about it. When you get attention from someone that you find attractive or that you're attracted to, regardless, it's a nice feeling. I don't care what setting you're in. I don't care if it's just attention, friendship wise or romantic. It feels great. And that's part of being human. Again, I'm calling it the camp effect because what will happen and what I've seen oftentimes is that the compression of time and the time not being linear really makes things move faster or slower or faster or slower, which kind of sways the real world effect. So just be aware of that. Be aware of the fact that you are choosing not the path of least resistance, which is totally cool too. But unfortunately, it's still stigmatized. And as a woman, if you're choosing to date on a boat, there's going to be questions of, well, now she's got favoritism, or now they're treating her differently, or it could be I don't want to say slut shaming, but that's what I don't know another word for it, but
Yeah,
that's unfortunately something that we deal with. It's a very conservative, for the most part, industry, and women's femininity is still something that isn't okay in a lot of these companies. It's not something that they've squared, as by the questions that we got about makeup, we got about feminine products. These aren't things that companies that have a lot of women, I'm sure they deal with it, but they can deal with it with a more well-rounded, more rounded idea of it. So the moral of the story, of course, it feels good to get attention on the boat, and that can change at any time too, to cut to, oh, this is really nice, someone's paying me attention. And then the camp effect, and then a week and a half later you see a little bit more about a person that you're like, oh, I don't really like that, or this is not something that I'm vibing with. How do I get out of this without losing professionalism? And I think that's just something that you're going to have to square with yourself, because unfortunately the opinions of others aren't yours to make. People are going to think of you what they're going to think of you.
yeah,
And that's life, unfortunately. I think, again, the most direct approach is being as honest as you can. And that's super hard. But being honest with someone, saying, hey, I thought I liked you, but, as time gone on, adding a little brevity to the situation or whatever, I'm not in a position to pursue this any longer. I'm sorry, whatever it might be. But if you can talk to someone as a human, I find that that's the best solution. We've all come across people that don't do well with the answers that they don't want to hear.
right, right.
And that's a very real thing too. And again, being on a vessel, like I'm saying, with this like compressed time thing, we might think that someone's one way, and then all of a sudden they flip the switch. And that's happened to me multiple times. There's also instances where I have been in the past where there's been a power dynamic, but I haven't realized that there's been a power dynamic. I think this is very common in a lot of situations, when it comes to, it's not assault, but there's a power difference that you might not realize in the time, that might take you a week or a month or a year to come into to realization with, like, that experience. While I participated in it, and I can understand why someone would participate in it now, and I can lend that hindsight, it wasn't right. It's not okay.
Right.
And I think as an older mariner, being able to ask some of the women that I come across, like, hey, I've been observing this power dynamic, regardless of what it is, between you. Are you comfortable with this situation? Like, are you actually comfortable with this situation? Perhaps talk to yourself like you would think a trusted mentor, adult, mom, aunt, girlfriend, older sister,
Yeah.
someone that has more experience might ask you questions. And it's not a judgmental thing. There's no judgment for me because I've made so many mistakes, guys. So many mistakes, and done all these things. I've totally been a party to all these things, whether or not I thought that I was doing it of my own volition or if I felt pressure or whatever. Like I've been there. I think a lot of us have, and that's a real reality of it. End of the day, you can't stop someone from saying what they want to say about you. It's the unfortunate truth of the world. And that's if you're willing to do what you want to do and be the person that you want to be in a industry that doesn't necessarily accept who we are as women or feminine or whatever that is, sexual creatures, whatever that might be, then those unfortunately are the consequences. But like I said before, standing up for yourself only helps other people come through behind you, which doesn't make it any easier. And this is not something that I would have been saying to myself graduating Cal Maritime on my first boat, making all these mistakes. No one said, yeah, these mistakes are going to be great because someone else is going to be able to,
Right. Yeah.
But that is true. That is a
Yeah.
true thing. So take a little solace in that. But it's really hard. It's really a hard thing to navigate. And unfortunately, we can't just go home to our homes at the end of the day. So it makes everything a little bit more gray to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Max, do you have anything else that you'd like to share with the women offshore community today?
We need you guys. We need more women out here. We need more different people out here. The more of us that there are out here, the more it has to change because we're equaling things out. That's just the way that it is. So we can make as much strides as we want, but unless we have the numbers out here, which it's getting better, and my God, it's getting so much better. It's so great to see. But until more people like me that are out here that look like me or look like you, different races, genders, ethnicities, all that stuff, it's not going to be equitable. So we really need you. And the support system is there. We're trying to make it better, and we're learning through our mistakes, and hopefully you guys can learn through our mistakes as well and just have more forums like this. And I'm really thankful for you, Christine, and Women Offshore to cultivate such a community, because like I said, it's just been a boys club, and it's really nice to have a group of women that I can like really connect with, and that's rare and beautiful thing. So thank you too.
Thank you, Max, so much for your time. I hope you get some good rest out there before your next time, your next charter.
Yeah.
And I can't wait for our next time to chat. Thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you so much.